somewhere deep in the Indian Ocean, far from shipping routes, far from tourists, and far from almost everything we consider modern civilization, lies a small, heavily forested island. At first glance, it looks like paradise: white sand beaches, clear blue water, thick jungle stretching from the shoreline to the center of the land, the kind of place that, on a map, looks untouched. Almost inviting, but this island is different. This is North Sentinel Island. Located in the Andaman Islands, under the jurisdiction of India, North Sentinel is one of the last places on Earth where humans have lived in near total isolation for thousands of years. No cities, no electricity, no contact with the outside world as we know it. And the people who live here, the Sentinelese, have made one thing very clear over time. They want to be left alone. Very little is known about the Sentinelese. There are no interviews, no shared language, no written records from their perspective. Everything we understand about them comes from distant observation, brief encounters, and the rare, often dangerous moments when outsiders got too close. Experts believe they are direct descendants of some of the earliest human populations to migrate out of Africa, meaning their way of life could stretch back tens of thousands of years. Imagine that for a second. While the rest of the world built empires, invented technology, connected continents, the Sentinelese continued living in a way that predates all of it. Completely separate, completely independent, and completely uninterested in joining the modern world. Over the years, there have been attempts to make contact, some peaceful, some cautious, some reckless. In the 20th century, anthropologists and officials from India made carefully controlled efforts to approach the island. They would leave gifts on the shore, things like coconuts, tools, or metal objects, and retreat, hoping to build some form of trust. Sometimes the Sentinelese would approach, sometimes they would take the items, and sometimes they would respond with hostility. There are documented cases of arrows being fired at boats, at helicopters, at anyone who came too close. In one instance, a helicopter flying over the island had to pull away as members of the tribe aimed weapons directly at it. To the outside worlds, this might seem aggressive, even extreme, but from their perspective, it makes perfect sense. Every single outsider represents a threat, not just culturally, but biologically. Because the Sentinelese have lived in isolation for so long, their immune systems have never been exposed to many of the diseases that exist in the rest of the world. Something as minor as the flu, or even a common cold, could spread rapidly and have devastating consequences. Diseases that most people recover from in days could wipe out an entire community. And this isn't just a theory. History has shown us exactly what happens when isolated populations come into contact with the outside world. Entire civilizations have been destroyed, not by war, but by illness. So, protecting the Sentinelese isn't just about respecting their wishes, it's about survival. That's why the Indian government has established a strict exclusion zone around North Sentinel Island. It is illegal to travel within several miles of its shores. No one is allowed to land there. No one is allowed to attempt contact, not tourists, not researchers, not anyone. The island is, quite literally, off limits to the entire world. And yet, despite the danger, despite the laws, despite the ethical risks, people have still tried. Fishermen have drifted too close. Explorers have pushed boundaries. And in some cases, individuals have made deliberate attempts to reach the island, fully aware of what could happen. Some of those encounters ended in warning shots, arrows fired from the beach. Others ended much worse. And now, in a world driven by content, views, and viral moments, a new kind of person has entered the story. Not an explorer, not a scientist, but a creator, a YouTuber. Someone willing to risk not only their own life, but potentially the lives of an entire isolated tribe, for the sake of documenting what no one else has seen. This is the story of North Sentinel Island, the last truly uncontacted place on Earth, and what happens when someone decides to go there anyway. After decades of strict warnings, legal barriers, and real-world consequences for anyone who even gets close, you would think North Sentinel Island would remain untouched, a place frozen in time, unreachable. But in the age of social media, that idea has started to change. Because today, the most dangerous places in the world aren't just seen as off-limits. They're seen as opportunities. Opportunities for views, for attention, for going viral. And that mindset is what led Mikhailo Viktorovich Polyakov to attempt something almost no modern outsider has ever done. Actually go there. Polyakov wasn't a mainstream creator. He didn't have millions of subscribers or a massive audience watching his every move. But he was part of a growing wave of content creators who build their channels around risk, going to places others won't go, doing things others won't attempt. And at some point he chose one of the most extreme locations possible, North Sentinel Island. Now this wasn't like planning a trip to a remote beach or a restricted city. This was different. Because getting to North Sentinel Island isn't just difficult, it's illegal. The waters around the island are monitored. Local fishermen know to stay away. Authorities in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands enforce a strict exclusion zone, designed specifically to prevent outsiders from making contact. So for Polyakov, this meant one thing. If he wanted to do this, he would have to bypass all of it. Reports suggest that his expedition wasn't a one-time attempt. He didn't just wake up one morning, rent a boat, and head straight for the island. He tried more than once. Multiple approaches, multiple efforts to get closer without being intercepted. Each time adjusting, learning, getting a little closer. Until, eventually, he succeeded. Using a small boat, described in reports as a simple, low-profile vessel, Polyakov set out toward the island. No official clearance, no protection, no backup, just open water, and a destination that has a reputation for rejecting outsiders by force. As he approached, the island would have slowly come into view. Dense, green forest, a narrow stretch of sand. No signs of modern infrastructure, no buildings, no docks, no indication of anything familiar, just land, and the possibility that he was being watched. Because one of the most unsettling things about North Sentinel Island is that you often don't know if the Sentinelese are there until they decide you've come too close. And when that happens, their response is immediate. There have been cases where boats approaching the island were met with arrows from the shore. Helicopters flying overhead have been targeted. Even distant observers have had to retreat when it became clear they were no longer welcome. So as Polyakov moved closer, every second mattered. At some point during this approach, he reached the shoreline, and for a brief moment, he stepped onto North Sentinel Island. Think about that. One of the most isolated places on Earth, a place that governments, researchers, and entire countries have agreed should remain untouched. According to reports, Polyakov didn't attempt direct interaction with the Sentinelese themselves. There's no confirmed evidence that he spoke to them, approached them, or had a face-to-face encounter. But that doesn't mean the risk wasn't there, because even without direct contact, the danger was still extreme. Before leaving, he placed items on the island. A coconut, a can of Diet Coke. On the surface, it might seem harmless, almost symbolic, a gesture. But in reality, it was something much more serious. Because any object introduced to the island carries unknown risks, bacteria, viruses, foreign materials the Sentinelese have never encountered before. And for a population that has lived in isolation for thousands of years, even the smallest exposure could have consequences. After a short time on the island, Polyakov left. He got back into his boat and returned. From his perspective, the mission was complete. He had done what almost no modern content creator had done before. He had reached North Sentinel Island. But what happened next is where the real consequences began. Because unlike the island itself, the outside world was very much aware of what he had done. He uploaded a video preview of his plans to visit the island to a public YouTube channel. The preview itself stand at 19,000 views, which garnered the attention of law enforcement in the surrounding area. Authorities quickly launched an investigation. How did he get there? Who helped him? How did he avoid detection? And once they identified him, the response was immediate. Polyakov was arrested. He was charged under Indian laws that are specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of situation. Laws that exist not just to protect outsiders, but to protect the Sentinelese from contact. These aren't minor regulations. They're strict, enforceable, and taken extremely seriously, because the risks aren't theoretical. They're real. Polyakov now faced the possibility of years in prison. Thanks for watching. Check out our last video on screen now, and subscribe if you enjoyed. Goodbye.